Kris, you were drafted by the Boston Bruins in the fifth round in the 2004 NHL draft. Why do you think the Bruins never gave you a chance?
I ended up getting drafted by another like GM. Shirelli got brought in. I was actually top 10 in scoring as a 20-year-old. So my rookie year in the AHL, I was top 10 in scoring. And Shirelli's team, or Boston, was about 2 or 3 points out of the playoffs, and they were trying to make a push, and they didn't think I was ready to come to Boston yet. Don Sweeney was the assistant GM at this time. And I had been called about a little bit prior, like, hey, you might be getting called up. Sean Donovan's hurt, Glenn Murray's hurt, a couple guys are now down, and we're only, 2 to 4 points out. Don't quote me on exactly, but it was roughly that. And Shirelli had Bochenski in Ottawa. And so that's how the trade happened. Shirelli ended up trading me for Bochenski, and Bochenski was leading the AHL in scoring. I believe he had like 33 goals in 36 games at the time, something crazy. And he was 4 or 5 years older than me, but they needed a veteran guy to come in with all these other guys out to help get him into the playoffs. So, yeah, rightfully so. They moved me out. I went to Chicago, and the rest is kind of history. But that's what happened. I still remember when I was on the bus that day. Don Sweeney called me. I was pretty emotional. Because I would, I didn't have the straightest path to that, and I really worked hard to make Boston happy. And I have more points than David Krejci as a rookie. Me and him are on line mates, but we put in a lot of work to do what I needed to do for them. And then, you think you're getting called up and boom, you're traded. So again, I still remember that call with Don Sweeney, talking about, basically thanking me for my time, but me also saying, hey, I got to prove you guys wrong now. And he kind of laughed. I still remember saying it to him. So I was happy I had that mindset at that time. You look back and you think of little moment changing times for you, and that could have been one that lit a fire in me. And who knows, if I didn't get traded, what would have happened? You never know.
Kris, you were traded a lot throughout your career. Like from an emotional perspective, like take the NHL business side out. Like how does one handle that? Like especially again, like when you are lighting it up in the AHL and they're like, hey, we're gonna trade you. Like starting with that moment, like how are you able to like emotionally process that and not take it personally like there's something wrong with me or I'm not good enough?
Yeah, that's hard. It is very hard. So the first time it happened in the pros, that's what you think. You're like, I'm not good enough. Why don't they like me? I'm leading my team in scoring as a rookie. What else can I do? And there was no glaring issue. So at that time, I know later in my career, you always you pipe up a little bit more here or there, but I've never been scared to do that. But the early on, it starts to kind of either put a chip on your shoulder or it can dent your confidence. And I think early on, it put a chip on my shoulder. So when I got to Chicago, I was like, I'm going to show Boston, and it played into my strengths, I thought. Then when I got traded from Chicago because of cap issues, um, we win a Stanley Cup, and then I get traded. It starts to dent your confidence, I think, a little bit. It starts to be like, wow, I just did everything I could, help them win a Stanley Cup, and now I get traded like 2 weeks after winning a Stanley Cup. That's where I started to think back on my career. I'm like, that started to dent how I felt about my game and myself. Went to Toronto, didn't start out very well. It started to kind of course correct itself, and I started actually playing really well in Toronto. And again, Brian Burke comes to me. He goes, "Hey, we've lost a bunch of first round draft picks. We gave up a few for Kessel." And he goes, "We need to get first round draft picks back. And there's only you and a couple guys we can get them for." And that's when they traded me and Caberlet then. And again, that's when it was like a double dent. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I think is my career, like, am I even gonna be able to play here soon? Then yeah, you go to Philadelphia. I don't play well in Philadelphia. I thought I played okay, had some good moments, but I'm not on power play consistently and not getting great minutes. And then at the end of the year, you talk to Paul Holmgren. I remember he's like, "What do you think you didn't score?" I'm like, "Well, you got to put me on the power play to score." Like, I don't know what else to tell you, Paul. I still remember the talk. And then they talked about keeping me, and I had a good talk with Laviolette at the end of the year. And then what happened is it was basically keep me or sign Yager. So they had $3 million left, and they ended up obviously trading me to Florida because Florida and Philly were bidding against themselves against Yager. And so they came to an agreement that they would trade me to Florida and they would retain and they would sign Yager for the equal money. that's how that. And I got traded to Florida. I remember that summer, I was like, I better go to work. I've just won the Stanley Cup and I've been traded twice within a year. Like this is crazy. And yeah, I was at a pretty shitty place, I'll say that, at the end of that year.
Can you kind of describe like what that place felt like for you, and then kind of how you got out of that, how all of like the dents of the confidence, how you started to kind of course correct and get yourself, back up?
Yeah, I mean, the next year I had the best year of my career. And it was, I went with my trainer every day again. We went to work on and off the ice. And I remember we did a ton of mental training, like a ton of mental training of basically, I started doing a lot of cognitive stuff when I was 2006, 7 to kind of change my belief in myself and my confidence. And we kind of went back to the drawing board on that and really started to rework how I thought and stuff I'd say to myself. And that, I go into Florida that year. I was put in a great position. I was put on the top line with two great players, and it was great. I mean, I had over a point a game basically at the 40 game mark. I was top 10, and then I tore my hip. So then the injuries started to kind of come up after that. But I just remember going into that season thinking, wow, I can be a really good player here. And had a great season. I came back and didn't finish that strong in Florida, but had a good playoffs and then had to get, I had double groin surgery, then hip surgery, then ACL all within a year. So it was like, three major surgeries within 18 months. And that piece I think was harder. But again, it was a lot of back to the drawing board with my trainer on, rewiring and rethinking how I thought. And without my trainer, I would have never been able to do it.
Yeah, the cognitive training is so important. I think that's the coolest part I feel like about the game and sports in general today is I feel like there's more of a focus on it now than there was, maybe years ago. And it's so interesting how that piece always seemed to get overlooked, because if you kind of think about it logically, like your mind's right, like then everything else will kind of follow.
It's the confidence. It's the what are you telling yourself? It's how, and whatever you tell yourself is basically how you sleep at night, And when I'm always playing my best, I can go to bed. When you're not playing good or you're missing chances, you don't fall asleep till 3, 4 in the morning. It's crazy. Your brain will think about one thing over and over and over and over, basically until you pass out. So it's in order to be in the pros, you have to be a little bit crazy, a little bit obsessed, but you also have to be obsessed in finding a solution.
Was there one thing that you learned in terms of the cognitive training where that was like the main tool you would bring out to help yourself when the mind was kind of running in circles or running in a direction you didn't want it to go?
Yeah, you always tried to breathe. And, we worked with a mental strength coach in Chicago too. And it was a lot of let it go, let it go. Think about the positive, think about, breathing in good energy and letting out the bad. So you'd always kind of go back to some of the breath work and what to think of, but let it go would be the biggest thing. It's if you're an athlete and you can it's always good to sit in a problem for a bit. Okay, what did I do wrong? What can I do to fix it? But not stay in the problem, and that's where I think you can go a little bit nutty is when your brain goes, it's like cyclical. It's crazy. Like you'll just like replay one play over and over and over and over. And then it's hard to get out of that. And then, you finally get out of it. And then the next game happens, right? So it's the ones who can generally let that go the fastest win.